What if Africa's greatest obstacle to economic freedom isn't its resources, politics, or people, but its currency? For decades, African nations have depended on foreign currencies like the US dollar and euro, leaving their economies vulnerable to external manipulation. But change is on the horizon. From the bold initiatives of Zimbabwe's gold-backed currency to Mali and Burkina Faso's push for regional monetary independence, the call for a unified African currency is louder than ever.
The neo-colonial project is alive and well, and it is at its most dangerous, and we Africans must smell the coffee. If we don't, they are going to continue to interfere. How else do they interfere? Through NGOs, Danida, CEDA, UK Aid, USAID. These are Trojan horses that are introduced into our countries for the purpose of influencing our processes, and they infiltrate our institutions. And remember, it is no longer just Europe. There is a new scramble for Africa. The Chinese are here, the Turks are here, the Qataris are here, and the military bases that you see here is telling you that if you don't behave, we are going to use force.
This is not just about money. It's about reclaiming economic sovereignty, breaking free from the shackles of foreign domination, and unlocking Africa's full potential. The question is no longer if Africa will take control of its financial destiny, but when. The fight for a common currency is the fight for true liberation, and Africa is ready. The journey holds secrets that PLO Lumumba insists the world must confront. Here, we would like to take a moment and thank you for supporting us and being a valued part of our strong community. And if you are not yet a member, we encourage you to join us and help build an even stronger community together. Let's get started. Colonialism, often thought to be a relic of the past, continues to manifest itself in modern African economies through the control of currency. While physical colonization may have ended with the political independence of African nations, monetary systems remain deeply rooted in colonial frameworks. This persistent control over currency has created an invisible leash, keeping African economies subservient to foreign powers and unable to fully realize their sovereignty. The most glaring example of this phenomenon is the CFA franc, used by 14 African nations across West and Central Africa. Created during French colonial rule, the CFA franc remains pegged to the euro, with its monetary policy dictated by the French treasury. This arrangement denies these nations control over their economic policies, forcing them to operate within parameters set by a foreign government. In effect, it ensures the continuation of colonial domination under the guise of financial stability. Beyond the CFA franc, many African nations rely heavily on global currencies like the US dollar and euro for trade, debt repayment, and financial reserves. This reliance means that the health of African economies is tied to decisions made in Washington or Brussels rather than within their borders. For example, when the US Federal Reserve adjusts interest rates, the ripple effects are felt across African markets, often leading to inflation, capital flight, or currency devaluation.
The year 1972, many African countries have pegged their currencies on the United States dollar. And the United States dollar is a fiat currency. It is a currency that is not backed by any resources. It migrated long ago from the days of Richard Nixon, from the gold standard, and they can print as much as they desire, and most of it finds its way in the continent of Africa as the medium of transaction. There are countries in Africa, for example, Zimbabwe, which for a long time used the American dollar as the currency of trade. And in many African countries, on a daily basis, the central banks determine the strength or otherwise of their currencies depending on the mood of the dollar. As the saying goes, when the dollar sneezes, African currencies go into a coma. And this is something that is undesirable. If you are not in control of your currency, it means that you cannot control your economy. And You will find, for example, in many African countries, even when loans are being borrowed from multilateral institutions such as the International Monetary Fund or the World Bank or even the European Union, the denominated currency is the United States dollars and, of course, recently the euro.
The control of currency has also been used as a tool to enforce neo-colonial policies. African nations seeking to break free from foreign monetary systems often face severe economic retaliation. A striking example is the sabotage of the proposed ECOWAS currency in West Africa, which was met with resistance from France. Such actions send a clear message. Attempts to challenge the status quo will be met with external interference.
One of the legacies of colonization is that all African countries inherited currencies that they did not create. And these currencies have become the medium via which the economies of African countries are judged and the media via which Africans conduct commerce. Today, there are nearly 42 different currencies in the continent of Africa. And this in and of itself creates an environment that is very volatile because these currencies are not in many ways determined in terms of their value from the countries that run them, so that many African central banks may know the volume of money that is in the market. Many African countries may know the currencies that they want printed, but the most important thing that they ought to know, which is how do we control these currencies, is controlled from elsewhere. We already know, for example, that in most of the former French colonies, the 14 of them in most of the Sahelian region and in Central Africa, most of the currencies are controlled from Paris, and there is a common currency called the CFA franc.
But is there even a way to break free from this? Here's a reminder to please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black culture, history, civilization, and identity. Let's continue now. The fragmented state of African currencies has long hindered the continent's ability to thrive economically. With over 40 currencies in circulation, each vulnerable to manipulation by external powers, Africa remains shackled by a legacy of division. A common African currency, however, presents a transformative solution, one that could unite the continent economically, boost trade, and establish Africa as a formidable player on the global stage. A unified African currency would resolve the inefficiencies caused by the continent's fragmented monetary systems. Currently, cross-border trade within Africa is burdened by fluctuating exchange rates and transaction costs, deterring economic integration. With a single currency, these barriers would dissolve, making intra-African trade seamless and cost-effective. The result? A thriving trade ecosystem that unlocks the full potential of the African Continental Free Trade Area, AFCFTA. A common currency would reduce Africa's reliance on foreign currencies, like the US dollar and euro, which currently dominate international transactions and debt repayments. By creating a currency backed by Africa's vast natural resources, gold, oil, and renewable energy, the continent could establish a stable and self-reliant monetary system. This would shield African economies from external shocks and the whims of foreign monetary policies, enabling true economic independence. The introduction of a common currency would foster stronger regional cooperation as nations align their fiscal policies to maintain stability. This unity would enhance collective bargaining power in global markets, allowing Africa to negotiate better trade deals, attract investment, and assert its economic interests on the international stage. A common currency would also reinforce political solidarity, furthering the vision of a united Africa.
Is how can we have an economy or economies which are dictated to from outside? I remember so very fondly and famously this statement of Ghana's Kwame Nkrumah: "Seek ye first the political kingdom, and the rest will come unto you." We sought and obtained possibly the political kingdom, but the economic kingdom has not come because we are not in control of our currencies. And one may ask, why must we be in control of our currencies? We must be in control of our currencies because it is the medium of exchange. We must be in control of our currency because it is what determines how our economy is going to interact with the rest of the world. We must be in control of our economy because it is the summation of the goods and services that are available within a country. We must control our currency because when we borrow, how we are burdened by borrowing is determined by the character of our currencies. And many African countries indeed have recognized the need to have currencies that are strong. It is in that regard that there has been a spirited move to have common currencies in the region. The East African countries have always wanted to move towards a common currency. And it must be remembered until 1977, the three East African countries of Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania had a common currency, which they pretty much controlled and which pretty much ensured that their economies were stable. We, of course, dissolved the East African community, and now there is once again a move towards having a common currency. In the West African region, until recently, there was a move to have a currency called the ECO, but that was torpedoed from Europe, as we know, particularly from Paris, and that was dead on arrival. And we in the Central African region, we now know with the recent events in Niger, in Mali and Burkina Faso, there is an attempt to create a currency that will cover that region. And one hopes that ultimately there will be a currency that is going to envelop the entire continent of Africa so that Africans can transact without the midwifery of a currency whose printing they do not control, of a currency whose value they cannot determine, of a currency which can be put into their markets and which can distort the markets in a manner that affects the economies of those countries or African countries by way of undermining their gross domestic product and indeed undermining their purchasing power. One of the things that I know, for example, now is that Africans in the diaspora are now trying to come up with a currency which is denominated through resources such as solar. And I know, for example, that Zimbabwe has recently introduced a currency called the ZiG, which is denominated against the gold standard. And one hopes and, of course, believes that if this is coordinated, Africa will move from the Tower of Babel in which she now finds herself, where one moves from one country, you move from Kenya, you find the Ugandan shilling, the Tanzanian shilling, the Dilasi, the Naira, the Cedi, the Bear, and the Kwanza. This kind of scenario is not good for African economies, and the sooner we migrate from this environment, from multiple currencies which are easy to manipulate, the safer Africa will be.
Investors often perceive African markets as risky due to currency volatility and inconsistent monetary policies. A unified currency would provide much-needed stability, attracting foreign direct investment and encouraging the growth of local enterprises. By creating a predictable economic environment, Africa could position itself as a lucrative destination for global investors, driving innovation and development across the continent. With a common currency, Africa could reclaim control over its monetary policies, ensuring they are tailored to the continent's unique needs rather than dictated by foreign powers. This empowerment would enable governments to prioritize local economic growth, create jobs, and invest in infrastructure and technology. A strong, unified currency would serve as a tool for economic liberation, allowing African nations to chart their destinies without interference. While the journey toward a common currency will require significant effort, regional integration, economic harmonization, and overcoming external resistance, the rewards far outweigh the challenges. A single African currency would not just be a medium of exchange, it would be a symbol of Africa's collective strength and determination to break free from the remnants of colonialism. By adopting a common currency, Africa can unite its diverse nations under a shared economic vision, creating a future where the continent's immense potential is harnessed for its people. This is not just a financial solution. It is a pathway to sovereignty, prosperity, and a new era of African empowerment.
It is important to talk about and to reiterate the fact that if indeed Africa wants to give practical meaning to Africa continental free trade area, it can only succeed if there is a common currency which is in use throughout the continent of Africa. If we are going to have an Africa continental free trade area which is underpinned by the United States dollar or is underpinned by the euro, then we are going nowhere, because economic domination will be determined by the currency that you are using on a daily basis. And a decision must be made at the level of the African Union that we must migrate from the dollar as the standard of determining the strength or otherwise of our currencies, and also migrate from the euro, so that whichever currency we create in the African continent, whether it is the Afro or whichever name we use, is going to be at the same table as other currencies, whether that currency is the dollar, whether that currency is the euro, whether that currency is the yuan, whether that currency is the rupee, whether that currency is the ruble, so that when those currencies meet in the international market, we are able to say that Africa is using a medium of trade which she controls and whose value she can determine. So from where I sit, if Africa is to realize our potential, one of the things that must be dealt with is currency. Let us migrate from these 42 currencies that we have today. Let us move towards a single currency, and let us move, if we can't do it in one fell swoop, let it start regionally, and once we have it regionally, then we will have a single currency, and let it be time bound. And in my view, in the next 10 to 15 years, we have a single currency, so that we don't denominate it with other foreign currencies. Then we can begin to talk meaningfully of a continent that is moving economically in the right direction. We can begin to talk about a continent that is talking about Agenda 2063, whose economy is not dependent upon a foreign currency. We can begin to talk about Africa continental free trade area, where somebody has a common currency which is used from Cape to Cairo, a common currency which is used from Addis Ababa to Dakar in Senegal, a common currency that is used in Kinshasa and also used in Marrakesh in Morocco. That is the kind of environment in which we should be operating, because currency is one of the keys that opens the doors of economic liberation. Africa must do that in order to gain economic liberation.
If Africa embraces the path of a common currency, the continent's success is not just possible, it is inevitable. A unified currency would eliminate trade barriers, reduce dependency on foreign monetary systems, and foster economic cooperation across borders. By leveraging Africa's abundant natural resources to back this currency, the continent can establish a stable and self-reliant economic framework. This move would empower African nations to control their financial destinies, attract investment, and negotiate from a position of strength on the global stage. With bold leadership, regional collaboration, and unwavering determination, Africa stands on the brink of a transformative era, one where economic sovereignty becomes the cornerstone of its collective progress. The vision of a prosperous, united Africa is no longer a distant dream. It is a near reality waiting to be realized. Do you think a single currency can save Africa? Will nations collaborate? Let us know in the comment section. Are you ready for an independent Africa? Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If so, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about: the Black culture, civilization, history, and evidence about how glorious Blacks have been. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.